What if some of the clearest signs of high IQ are the exact things people keep misreading about you? You take a few extra seconds to answer a simple question, so they assume you are slow. A tiny sound in the room breaks your concentration, so they assume you are difficult. You dive hard into something, master it fast, then lose interest, so they assume you lack discipline. You question your own abilities so often, so deeply, that people assume you are just not that capable. But here's the part most people miss. Some of the clearest signs of high IQ do not look impressive from the outside. They look inconvenient. They do not always look like confidence, speed, or a person who always has the perfect answer. Sometimes they look like intensity, sensitivity, silence, friction. In this video, we are going to break down 10 signs of high IQ that most people misread, and the most misunderstood one is usually not the most obvious. Now, one important thing before we start. No single trait on this list proves that someone has a high IQ. Not on its own. Some of these signs can overlap with ADHD, autism, giftedness, stress patterns, or just certain personality traits. So this is not about grabbing one habit and calling yourself a genius. It is about looking at the pattern, the intensity, and the way several of these signs tend to show up together. One trait means very little. The pattern means much more. So with that in mind, let's start with the sign that gets mislabeled the most, overthinking. The first sign is that they tend to overthink. Someone asks them a simple question, and instead of answering right away, they pause. Not because they have nothing to say. Because their mind is already checking the wording, the angle, the consequence, and the possibility that the obvious answer is not the full answer. A conversation can end, and their body may leave the room, but their mind does not. It keeps replaying the tone, the silence after a sentence, the part that did not sound right. Even a small decision can turn into a chain reaction of possible outcomes. From the outside, this looks like anxiety, hesitation, or unnecessary complication. But in psychology, part of what you are seeing may be metacognition. That is the ability to not only think, but to monitor your own thinking while it is happening. And that changes everything. Because now the brain is not just searching for an answer, it is evaluating the answer, questioning the answer, and testing the answer before it speaks. Of course, this has a cost. It is mentally exhausting. It slows action. It makes it hard to just relax. But what looks like hesitation is sometimes a mind refusing to settle for a shallow answer. The second sign is something a lot of people laugh off until they experience it for themselves. They are extremely sensitive to ambient noise. A pen clicking in a meeting, someone chewing too loudly, a notification sound that keeps repeating, the hum of a TV in the next room. To most people, these are minor background details. Annoying maybe, but manageable. For some high IQ minds, they are not background at all. They stay in the foreground. They keep pulling attention. They keep interrupting the internal thread of thought. Some people hear the noise and move on. Others keep hearing it until thinking itself gets hijacked. This can be related to something psychologists and neuroscientists describe through sensory gating. In simple terms, the brain is supposed to filter out part of the noise so you can stay focused on what matters. But some minds seem to let more of the environment through. So this is not always being dramatic. It is not always being impossible to please. Sometimes it is just a brain that cannot fully mute what other brains easily downgrade. And yes, that sensitivity can be exhausting, but it can also come with an upside, noticing patterns, errors, and subtle changes faster than most people do. The third sign is that they often get bored quickly after mastery. At first, they can look obsessed, fully locked in, highly motivated. They learn the rules fast, find the structure fast, and push hard in the beginning. But once they understand how the system works, something changes. The energy drops. A class becomes unbearable once the pattern is obvious. A training program starts to feel slow. A new project loses its pulse the moment there is nothing left to figure out. From the outside, this can look like laziness, inconsistency, or a lack of discipline, but that is not always what is happening. A lot of motivation comes from novelty, challenge, and mental stimulation. When the challenge disappears, the reward value of the task can drop with it. The problem is no longer feeding the mind. They do not always lose interest because they are weak. Sometimes they lose interest because the problem stopped being alive. That is why some highly intelligent people look intensely committed at the start, then strangely detached later. It is not always that they hate effort. Sometimes they hate the feeling of being mentally underfed. And that leads naturally to the fourth sign. They often question their own abilities. This is one of the strangest paradoxes of intelligence. The people who know the least are often the quickest to sound certain. But people with sharper minds are often much slower to feel fully sure of themselves. Why? Because the more clearly you understand something, the more clearly you also see what is missing. You do a good job, but your mind goes straight to the weak point. You solve the problem, but you also see the 10 ways it could have been better. What looks impressive to other people can feel ordinary to you, simply because your brain processed it so fast that it never felt dramatic. This is part of what makes the Dunning-Kruger effect so fascinating. People with less skill often do not see the full complexity of a problem. People with more skill usually do, and once you see that complexity, confidence becomes harder to fake. That is also why imposter syndrome can show up in highly intelligent people. Not because they have no ability, but because they can see how much ability still has room to grow. The more clearly you see the map, the harder it is to fake simple confidence. And then the pattern starts to shift. Up to this point, these signs may have sounded serious, even heavy, but the next ones are different. Because some of the most functional signs of high intelligence are the exact ones people laugh at, dismiss, or label as weird. They can look immature, socially off, even slightly odd, but underneath that surface, the brain may be doing something highly organized. And that brings us to the fifth sign. They often talk to themselves, not dramatically, not in some unstable theatrical way, more like a quiet voice under the breath while organizing a thought, solving a problem, or preparing for an important call. From the outside, this can look strange, but in cognitive psychology, this is often described as self-directed speech. In simple terms, putting thoughts into words can help the brain structure them more clearly. That is why some people quietly narrate the steps of a problem, or say an idea out loud just to hear whether it makes sense. The moment the thought has sound, the hidden flaw becomes easier to catch. So this is not always a sign of losing control. Some people think best in silence, others think more clearly once the thought has sound. The sixth sign is that they often feel more mentally alive at night. Not because the night magically makes them smarter, but because it removes a lot of what interferes with their thinking during the day. Daytime is full of noise, messages, social demands, small interruptions, and constant low-level stimulation. For some minds, that creates mental static. But late at night, the world finally quiets down. This connects loosely to differences in chronotype, the natural rhythm that affects when people feel more alert or productive. So no, staying up late does not automatically mean someone has a high IQ, but for some highly active minds, the night is where thinking finally feels clean again. For some minds, the night is not where they become smarter, it is where the interference finally drops. The seventh sign is something that gets judged very quickly from the outside. They often use active procrastination. It can look like they are avoiding the task, like they still have not started, like they are wasting time while the deadline gets closer. But inside, something else may be happening. Their mind is still working on it, still turning it around, still testing versions in the background. This is where psychologists sometimes make a distinction between passive procrastination and active procrastination. One comes more from avoidance and poor self-regulation. The other can involve delay with continued mental processing underneath it. And that connects to something called the incubation effect, when stepping away from a problem can still help the brain keep working on it indirectly. Of course, this is not always a strength. It can create pressure, last-minute stress, and sometimes self-sabotage. But sometimes the delay is real, and sometimes the work is still happening just in a place other people cannot see. They are not always delaying the thinking. Sometimes they are delaying the execution until the structure feels ready. The eighth sign is that they often have a selective memory. This is one of those traits that can look funny from the outside. They can remember a password they made 3 years ago, recall the hidden pattern inside a complex problem, or instantly recognize a structure they have seen before, and then forget where they left the charger, or the keys, or take the wrong turn on a route they have driven before. This is not always bad memory in the general sense. The brain works with limited attention and working memory, so it is constantly prioritizing what it sees as useful. Some minds naturally hold on to structure, logic, and meaningful patterns better than routine details. So they may forget the small thing in front of them and still remember the deeper thing underneath it. But here is where the misunderstanding gets even deeper. A lot of people assume that if someone has a sharp mind, they must also be emotionally distant. That intelligence should make a person colder, harder, less affected. In many cases, the opposite is closer to the truth. The ninth sign is that they often feel emotions deeply and intensely. There is a stereotype that highly intelligent people are cold, detached, or less emotional. But many of them are not less emotional at all. They are simply better at hiding how much is happening underneath. A small comment can stay with them for hours. A slight shift in someone's tone can feel louder than the actual words. A dishonest signal, even a subtle one, can make them pull back immediately. And heartbreak does not just hurt once. It keeps replaying, because the mind keeps revisiting it from every angle. This connects to what psychologist Kazimierz Dabrowski described as overexcitabilities. In simple terms, some people do not just think with more intensity, they respond with more intensity too. That means the inner world is often richer, but also heavier. A sharp mind does not always protect a person from pain. Sometimes it gives the pain more places to echo, and that is the trade-off. Greater depth can bring greater understanding, but it can also bring overload. That is why many highly intelligent people become very selective about closeness, solitude, and who gets access to their inner world. And the 10th sign, maybe the most important one of all, is that they have endless curiosity. If there is one trait that quietly connects almost everything on this list, it is this. They do not stop at the first answer. They keep going. They keep asking what is underneath it. Why did that happen? Why do people work that way? What is the mechanism behind it? What is the pattern beneath the pattern? In psychology, this is often called need for cognition. It describes people who do not just tolerate deep thinking, they are drawn to it. That is why they read about things that have nothing to do with their job, why they go down strange research paths at night, why a simple answer rarely satisfies them for long. Intelligence is often misread as speed, but one of its deepest forms looks more like relentless curiosity, not the need to look smart, the need to understand, and once that drive is strong enough, it keeps showing up everywhere. So what is the real takeaway here? Many signs of high IQ do not get recognized as intelligence in everyday life. They get misread as awkwardness, difficulty, inconsistency, oversensitivity, overthinking, being too intense, being too much. But in some people, these traits are not random flaws. They may reflect a deeper way of processing the world. Of course, this is not a diagnosis, and it is not a trophy either. One sign alone means very little. What matters more is the pattern, the intensity, and the way these traits tend to appear together. So if some of these felt familiar, the point is not to call yourself gifted. It is to stop misreading traits that may belong to a much deeper kind of mind. And if this video gave you a new perspective, take a second to like it. That really helps Psyche-Life reach more people who may have been misunderstood for a long time. I'd also love to hear from you in the comments. Which sign gets misunderstood most in your life? Or which one do people misread in you most often? And if you want more videos like this, quiet, honest, psychology-based, and built to help you understand yourself more clearly, subscribe to Psyche-Life. And if your mind rarely slows down even when the room does, the next video on your screen goes deeper into why that happens.